Thank you very much, Rom. That was beautiful introduction as we enter this exploration into the art of listening. So yes, welcome to Portals of Perception and to a special conversation about the art of listening with a circle of friends who have come together, I believe more than 3 years ago, to not talk about listening, but to practice and be and discover listening. The central portals inquiry is, where does the future come from? And often there is the assumption that the answer to this question is in what we say. So today we want to contemplate about the idea and the sense that the future may actually reveal itself through our listening. What we listen to, how we choose to listen, and perhaps even more importantly, why we focus on listening. So let me begin with Cynthia, because you instigated this exploration. And let me ask you first, what inspired you? And what catalyzed for you that idea, that inspiration, that sense of let's come together with a circle of friends, and perhaps even more importantly, what kept you in the practice these years, and what is it you're discovering about the nature of the exploration you're in? Please.
Thank you, Aviv. Where to begin? I think that certain people are more prone to listening, and then certain people want to cultivate it. I'm probably more of a more prone person in listening, but I wanted to discover the bigness of it. So I asked a group of friends, and we meet every couple of weeks, and we basically create an ecology that, because we're each coming with a love of listening, something magical happens. Magical in the terms of it creates a safety for everyone to come and be themselves. So what I'm discovering with the listening way is that there is like a fabric of safety and permission for each person to bring themselves to the table, to the conversation, with a kind of freedom. And if you think just for a couple of seconds what it might be like if this quality existed in the world, widespread across humanity in our daily lives, can begin to taste the life-changing dynamic in the simple act, seemingly simple act, of listening. And of course, as we've mentioned many times in our processes, there's such a difference between hearing and listening. So the listening with the deeper part of oneself comes with a real, genuine interest in what future, as you say, Aviv, in what future might be appearing in the next moment. So it can be absolutely thrilling to be sitting at the edge of your seat in reception of what another person might say and will say. And your filter, some of it just goes right through, and some of it is just amazing, and you can't keep yourself from responding to them. So then there begins a whole dynamic and interplay between the listener and the speaker, and it becomes very multiple and safe and fruitful and engaging. So that's a bit, Aviv.
Thank you. Thank you. So, what I'm sensing right now is that through your words and introduction, we're actually in real time dropping into a deeper space of listening. And there is it's in the words that you offer when you talk about ecology, when you talk about we come together and we create an ecology that offers safety where we can be ourselves, whatever that means for each and every one of us. And then when you describe the sense of freedom, so there are the words I'm receiving, and then there is the energetic quality, the intonation, the felt sense of the presence that you actually generate about those things. So I would invite now that we open the space, and we also allow for the sometime pauses. Because sometime when you are with a circle of friends and you say, let us make today space for listening with more than our heads, more than just head listening, but a whole person, somatic listening. And sometime to drop into that space, we actually allow for elongated pauses between one person to the next. So when a person speaks, there is the longer echo after they have spoken, and then there is the space that's created for the next person that is called to speak. So I will pause here and make the space for whoever is ready to speak to us about this, in one way mysterious, and in another way simple and yet profound realm of human life, listening.
It's been said that about 20% of communication is through words, which says there's another 80%, give or take, that isn't, yet is communicated. So in our world of constant words passing between people, the listening to the other 80% sometimes may get not really so much realized. And it can be more like a fog. So one doesn't really hear or listen. There's a lot of mental projection that goes on. There's a lot of what do I want to say that goes on. There are many things that go on that occupy the energetic space. So in clearing that space is really part of the listening process, or at least being willing to do that and then allowing that to happen. You know, because it does require effort if one particularly isn't as say as inclined as Cynthia is towards being a listener. And in that, the listening, there is a kind of a permission if with other people, because it is a two-way something that happens. And that is very mysterious, because what then allows the next thing to be really realized or explored or opened up. So I'll start with that.
One dimension of listening is in the obvious dance between speaker and listener. And this is a very clear location to the whole function and magic of listening. So on the one hand, there is a speaker that creates worlds with words. On the other side, there is a listener creating the space for these worlds to go into and inhibit. So it's a very essential space-making facility that one human can provide to another human. But part of my great fascination was a surprising fascination for me to do with, I can call it, the science of hearing and the art of listening. Because let's not forget hearing, it's part of the process. Part of my fascination is this huge domain that was revealed to me, starting with the more obvious aspect of listening as part of a conversation, as part of the communication arts that we human have and can practice, but gradually moving to the more mystical side, because there is also a mystical side to listening. This was something that I discovered along the journey. And it's to do with the presence of silence and the place of silence. In inner peace, inner quiet, and silence is a very important ingredient in making oneself a much, much better and deeper listener. And then not to forget that there is a whole lot to the listening than the one that is related to the conversation that happens between humans. First and foremost, the listening to oneself. And then the listening to the sounds of nature and the sounds of life. And even more so, to listen to that which does not have a voice. So it opens the door to many fascinating, profound dimensions.
Hello, everyone. Just shortly before we came together today, I realized something I'd never seen before. I was looking at the letters that make up the word listen, and if you rearrange them, it can come to enlist. And I thought that was really interesting because what it brought to mind was the idea of enrolling for something. And the journey I've been having with listening so far has been very much like that, because I'm discovering that I have to want to do it. And that if you think about this idea of enlisting for something, it's a volunteering service or a job. And it's a bit like that, because the facility of listening can really offer something very special to another, and also to oneself whilst you do it. And I've been discovering that if I think about it in that way of giving service, it kind of takes the I out of it. And I can be more at ease and more vacant, really, more empty, which really seems to help. And one of the challenges is that we live in a situation where we get bombarded and we're very crowded out with so much. And so one of the challenges for me is in being able to find a stillness, find a space inside where it can simply happen, because it seems to me it's a very natural thing to do. It's not really been, for me, a journey of having to learn how to do something exactly, but more what to subtract so it can happen. And it seems that each person has their own pathways to finding stillness. For some, it might be to spend a bit of time in the garden. For another person, it might be listening to a particular piece of music. For another person, it might be reading or meditating. And I think that's a good thing to do, is to discover your own pathway to stillness. Where I feel often when I'm listening, I'm kind of in a curious way, a bit sort of absent. My usual self is kind of absent. And in that space, there's no kind of commentary going on upon what I'm receiving. It's simply happening. And I feel feelings that I don't feel at other times when that happens. And it feels really very special. And there's an intimacy, a sense of intimacy with it that feels wonderful. And it seems to have many dimensions, but one of them is something that has a very healing nature about it, or a healing sense about it, in which another person may never really have felt truly received by another in speaking with them. And it brings you into something very close in. And it can be quite remarkable. And I remember somebody once asking me, quite a curious question. They said, what is it like being you? And I'd never been asked that before. And what that question allowed was I felt somehow my response came from a deeper part of myself. And I actually didn't know what I was going to say. I'd never been asked that question before, but as I responded, I was kind of making a bit of a voyage of discovery, and discovering that there was a lot more to me than I'd thought before. And it was very special, and I'll never forget it.
Jeremy, you mentioned the world that we're in is a busy place, and my entrance into ability to listen had a lot to do with the velocity and speed. I once broke my foot. It happens. But when it happens, you're forced to slow down. And I realized that everything else around me was not changing speed, but I was. And those two things didn't quite gel at that point, because I had my normal speed or velocity of walking, and suddenly I couldn't kind of catch up with the rest of the world. Cars and bikes and everyone else around me in daily life seemed suddenly to be able to run at a pace that I simply couldn't do at that point. And that's the first time when I really felt that it changed not only the ability to walk, but it had an influence to the inner life, the feeling of life inside. And that was quite a surprise to me. So there's a life inside that registers the speed of the outside world, but also the inside world. And for that, I see very much the ability going from hearing and the art of, the science of hearing, and developing then the art of listening. That seems like two quite different worlds to me. Then later in my life, I happened to be in a situation where I suddenly had a speed that I couldn't change. It changed, and I couldn't change it back to my normal speed. And that was a personal development experience that I shall never forget. Because when you can't change what's changing, it may change you. And it did. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Hello, everyone. It occurs to me that there are many ways of listening. And one way is that when I feel a kind of sadness, I like to listen to really music which gets me off the chair and doing something like dancing. But also there is this, sometimes when you listen, an interpretation comes in the way. You cannot really listen what it is for real, because I already have a thinking of, oh, that must be that way. Or so I think it's an art to really not only deep listening what a person wants to say, or it's also how do you receive it? So it's something like, someone mentioned it, it was like a dance, but I can feel all the time that in the listening, there is the rhythm, there is the sound, there are words which I cannot look clear at it, and there are new words which makes me thinking of actually retreat and wants to think later because I received some words I didn't know about. And someone was calling it an art, but it is an art. I just discovered it, that it is an art. So does it belong to all kind of arts of living? That's my question mark now.
I remember when I was very young, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, that I was fascinated by sound. And the moment when we, with the family, were sitting at the table for lunch, it was a great opportunity because there were all these different objects on the table. And I had a knife. And everything that I hit gave a different sound. And till the day today, I know the difference between hitting a cup or hitting a glass. So listening connects to the memory, or the memory connects back to what you hear the next day again. So that's interesting. And then I remember that when I was young, I was listening to the owls in the forest. And somebody taught me how to copy the sound of an owl. And I tried to communicate. And I had a sense that they were listening and that they were responding to my sounds. So that's another thing about listening. It's about making known what you are and detecting what you are dealing with. Now, and then later in life, when I was around 10 years, I started playing music. So that's now some 50 years ago. So I've been listening to myself for 50 years whilst learning to play instruments. And I had a teacher for a few years. And she tried to teach me all sorts of things, but she never taught me how to listen to what I was actually doing. Because there was always this overlayer of, you're still not doing it right. Yeah. So that comes in the memory as well. And every time I try it, more of this, you're still not doing it right, was added to my memory and my experience. Which makes it quite a struggle to actually listen to what you are hearing. Because it becomes very noisy in the head. It becomes very noisy. And it even went that bad that it didn't even just stay in the head. It went to my muscles. Because every time I tried something, my brain told me, you're doing it wrong again. And that's what the muscles seem to remember as well. So I started doing things wrong, again and again and again and again. And it's only lately that I start to get interested in what I'm actually trying to do. And that's where it becomes facing, because this noise, this voice in the head becomes very noisy. And only by making a decision to actually want to be quiet and actually listen to what I'm trying to do and to be in support of that creates a space. So I start to discover that there are so many layers in listening, and that the art of listening really brings a human in the now, because only in the now you can actually listen to what is going on. And that's on the outside, and it's on the inside. And on the outside, we all have heard the song of a bird. But did we actually hear it? Or did we already say, oh yeah, that's a blackbird, or that's a robin? And by doing that, boxing it into all the 100 times that you learned, or that you already heard the blackbird. So the art of listening really brings the human right in the now.
There are 3 permanent processes that take place in all living systems. And we humans, we are a living system. So these 3 processes, they occur inside each one of us all the days of our life. One is the process of decay, because right when, even after our moment of birth, there is a beginning of cellular decay. And the second, of course, is the process of renewal. So we are forever engaged with these 2 processes. The part of us that is decaying, that we are learning to search to find a way to release, to let go, and the process of renewal. And there is a third process, which is the system itself looks to find in every moment its equilibrium. I don't think there is a verb in the dictionary for it, but I would turn it into a verb by saying equilibriuming, by way of a search to find that point. And we know that in the human body, it's about 80 to 100 days where we replenish the totality of ourselves. So biologically, we are almost a new person within 80 to 100 days. Energetically, it occurs much faster, because in the energy field, there is an exhale and inhale process that occurs about every 7 to 8 seconds. The energy field, the aura goes, and it repatterns itself, reconfigures its patterns. And in that, about 70 or 80 or 85 or sometime 90% is largely automated processes that reform the patterns that were there before, but perhaps 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% is a whole new configuration, which is an expression of our current attention and focus and feelings and sentiments and thoughts at that point in time, and how those dimensions of the inner experiences that we have manifest in the energy field. So there are 2 challenges that I observe that many people, or most people, or perhaps you would even say all people, struggle with, which is why it comes into listening. The first is that because of the intensity and the crowdedness that some of you have spoken to of modern life, we are disjointed, we are frazzled, we are spread all over the place in the 17 other places we've been in the last few hours, either physically or mentally. If you went on a social media, you went down a rabbit hole, and part of you is left there and in another place. So the first thing that occurs in listening and how it impacts that energy, inhale, exhale, and inhale, is that I find that when we listen deeply to another person, we actually help them regather themselves, reintegrate the fragments that they left all around. Because all of a sudden, it's as though we are telling them that other person, you, the person now watching and listening to this, you are important. So much of modern life is this chase of, I must be missing something now, I must be somewhere else, I must be doing something else, I must be developing this or building that or buying this or buying that. And all of a sudden, we all, or one person, is bringing the entire focus of listening to you. And they're saying by their presence, you are important. There has never been in the history of the universe another person like you. Maybe you never thought about reason or purpose, something like that to do with life, but you are here for a reason, maybe not even your purpose, but something you have to share with the rest of us. And for many, if that happens, it perhaps is the first time ever they will be listened to, because I've found in working with people for many years, it's almost shocking. Most people have never, ever experienced truly being listened to. Never. And when all of a sudden they have a chance to be listened to, it's utterly transformative. It's as though for the first time ever they can come home inside. So yes, I feel that what we're hearing and listening to here today carries profound healing properties. So there is here a sense today of healing, of listening as healing. The second thing that many people are challenged with, all of us, really, where listening makes a huge, profound difference, is so challenge one was we are frazzled and fragmented and disjointed all over the place. The other side of it is we cook ourselves inside our own microwave. We are inside our own thought process, and for the majority of people, there is a kind of a repetitional process unless they practice some of what we're hearing is proposed, getting into this place of stillness, learning to not identify with a recurring thought through a variety of practices. So, but what happens when a person cooks themselves? What happens is their energy field goes and they suck in all that they just emitted energetically, and they reproduce it to a large degree the same. So it's a recycled energy. I find that when we listen to each other deeply, the profound healing and dialysis service we offer to each other is, so you take in some of the energy that I am emitting with what I'm saying. I take in some of the energy that you are emitting, and I listen in a place that's open, that's non-judgmental, that's free, that's honoring. As some of you describe, I listen from a place of mystery. Who is this human being? What is a human being anyway? It's such an extraordinary mystery. And when I am in that place of deep listening, I take in some of what you just emitted, and you're able to receive it almost like through a dialytic filter that provides you the freedom to, instead of just cooking yourself by yourself, discover an inner space, a larger space inside that offers you the freedom, a bit like Rob, what you were describing. You kept hearing wrong, wrong, wrong. And one day, there was a space in you that said, hold on a minute, I can observe how I am listening to my listening. It's like 3 layers of listening. You're listening to another person, you're listening to yourself, listening to the other person, and you are listening to the conscious presence that's listening inside to that listening. It's utterly profound. And when we offer each other that space, we offer each other the freedom to choose what do we integrate and admit back into ourselves as, yes, this is part of me in this moment, and this other part, it was part of me 5 minutes ago, but I don't have to hold on to it. I can be free to let it go. So, yes, listening is healing, and listening is a way of becoming listening priests, because we give permissions and space for others to birth themselves anew inside the presence of our listening.
Aviv, that was amazing. What I heard was so many ingredients being articulated into something that I can't say back to you at the moment, but the listening as healing is almost undeniable the way you're speaking about it. And I wanted to ask Charles, because in our last listening gathering, you brought in listening as a midwife, is being a midwife. And I think Aviv just touched on this. And for me, it's opened up a whole world, another facet of listening. So Charles, would you mind sharing a bit on that?
Sure. One of the things, there's actually a couple threads that I think are an important aspect of this. One is curiosity. I think this is something that is a major ingredient in listening, and something that helps manage our own selves in the process. And I think a lot of people have touched on it today, the importance of getting yourself out of the way as the listener. And one of the ways to do that is to find whatever it is you can be curious about in the process, in the other person, in the words, anything that'll help make that connection. And in responding to Aviv, I love demonstrating something to students, which is this one. If I have an apple and you have an apple and we exchange apples and then walk away from each other, we still only have one apple each. But in the listening worlds, in the idea worlds, if I have an idea and you have an idea and we exchange ideas, we both have two ideas now. Or in the case of today's meeting, maybe 14 ideas now or 50 ideas. And we can exchange those and be all the better for it. And being a midwife then is, there's an activation that needs to happen, right? And I feel like that comes from the curiosity. And it's one of the responsibilities, I think, of a really good listener is to pull on those threads that the speaker might not even know are happening. And the reason is because the speaker is often engaged like in their own mind, and they might not have the capacity to see what's happening in the atmosphere of the conversation. But hopefully the listener can do that as a service and help pull those threads of the conversation out of the person who's speaking. A lot of times speakers are very passionate about something, right? And so they're taken over by it and might miss the whole spectrum of things. And again, this is something that a good listener can help provide is, what about this? Have you thought about this? Those types of things where hopefully we're in a state of listening where we can appreciate the 360-degree view, or however you want to put it. So there's a few things.
It made me recall, Charles, that when the practice of coaching came into the world, one of the so-called revolutionary attitudes was that when you listen to somebody whom you're supposed to be coaching, you don't immediately rush to give them answers or advice or suggestion. You prod them further into the release and the let go of what they are loaded with by asking more questions. So it's another very important clue how this service of midwifing can be played to draw more, to find ways to draw more, so more can be liberated. And anyway, in the process, when a person heals themselves, they will discover a lot of things about what is going on in them and how to deal with it.
Let me ask a question about three three additional dimensions of listening, and invite whoever is ready to speak to these. One you touched, Charles just touched it, and Jeremy earlier, and some of you, is what else can be offered about the inner work of listening? What is it we do to actually create a space and listen? And you talked about getting yourself out of the way. What else? What else can be said about the inner work of listening? So that's space one, whoever is ready to speak to that. Space two, building on that, is what about listening in difficult situations? What about listening when there is a conflict? What about listening when there are two opposing parties, whether it's a business situation or even more extreme situation where people are on two warring sides? What can be said about listening in that space? I'll actually pause this with these two areas and I'll bring the third inquiry, which is a whole other space, later. Let's see if anybody can offer some.
May I add a question?
Okay, please.
It turned up today. Is listening an action?
I'd like to add something else that comes into this mix, which in listening and in speaking and communicating, usually one side has something in mind, either by need or they need to get rid of so they can move to the next, or there's something else that's needing attention. And the other side, if it's well received, you're looking at something else in the middle that needs, wants, has something that usually it's a need that's being responded to. Our speeds, our sometimes not taking time for ourselves so that we listen inside to be able to listen outside doesn't always allow us to receive what that is that person is actually looking to be with, respond to, solve. So we end up having things going back and forth and back and forth. And then part that doesn't promote the listening, but it also means that part that whoever it is trying to get to can't come to play. And in so many places, it represents a lack of communication. So I would add that piece in, because as I've been listening to what's being said, I'm hearing other parts from different people, because it's not the same from each person, even if you're talking about the same thing that gets brought into whatever this is in the exchange, because the exchange is only part of it. It's something else that we're exchanging about. And the feeling that comes when this third thing when we actually get to it, there's a very different level of satisfaction. Parties feel like both sides got heard, nourished, healed, acquitted, whatever it is that's not resolved. And it doesn't even have to be the same, whatever that was that got from this third something. So I'll stop there.
Need does seem to be a big trailhead, which was cooking in me as well, because you can get, say, two people together talking. It may not be vocalized what the need is, but in the listening, not just to the words, but to something else, the cry or the need of some kind, if one is aware of it, willing, focused, there can be, through the listening of just even noticing, already offering a space for somebody's life to not be dismissed. So there's something in the cry of life in a person that goes beyond just, say, a conversation, yet conversation comes into it as well. Because we have many parts to ourselves that we appreciate and recognize. Different types of intelligences. And it seems that the most potent thing is the need and the reason why one would listen. Or else it's a cacophony potentially of just all those things that Aviv you were talking about. There's 17 different things all going on and noise. So it's something about, in a way, a decision made to listen, but also hearing for the need that might be expressed in one's boundaries or parameters of how far one will go in receiving and being the vehicle, the midwife for the need of, it doesn't have to be a person actually, but within the world of people, definitely. And I've seen it work. It is extraordinary when people are received. Something changes, even if only a little bit. So need seems to be an extremely potent factor in this, in terms of the healing anyway, it would seem.
I'd like to have a go, Aviv, at both questions. In terms of what do you need to do to bring yourself to a listening space? Really, I'm looking, and I have been this whole time, at Emmy. I'm pointing you out, Emmy, and the way that I feel the reverence that you're holding for the listening space is such a beautiful thing. And I feel that you don't even need to articulate or speak into it, but it's saying and holding volumes. And this word reverence is such an amazing alignment that will allow us to sort of hover above whatever the main topic is happening. There's a kind of overview of reverence about how awesome the fact of a human bringing something into definition from their own conductive realms, their own energetic realms. It's quite a place. And so witnessing Emmy listening is just a real thrill for me. So the other thing that comes is how much can happen with neutrality. So say that you're at the table in a very difficult conversation. And if you happen to be part of that conversation, wow, you're really challenged. But if you're a witness to that conversation, it's a little easier to hold the space for the parties as they grapple with whatever dynamic it is. And I think that there's that neutrality that's just so in love with the fact that as a humanity, we are living and breathing our next discoveries together. And there's a kind of support, even though there might be nastiness or unfortunate, there's a kind of support for the fact of it going on and a kind of trust that things do improve. Things do find their way, things do find their balance and equilibrium, as you were speaking earlier, Aviv. So there's so many ingredients, aren't there? But those are the few that are rising at the moment. Great questions, Aviv. Thank you.
I mean, I thought it's to respond to your first question. I find that I'm one person, but within me, there are many sides to a person, and the person is not just one thing. There's the quiet Zeus, and there's the Zeus that cooks food. There are many aspects in me that almost have an identity in itself inside. And one of the elements that leads to a deeper listening to me is that those lives have a way to integrate, if I see it that way. So if I'm occupied with many doings and being busy all day, I may have been engaging with 25 different aspects of what Zeus is. And they each have their role and their voice. And it can get to be a bit too much, so I can't find myself. But if I can offer an ecology inside that allows integration, where I feel inside that I'm supported by many voices within, that's very stimulating for listening. So what I see from your question is that first of all, I'm not a one person, maybe in appearance and physicality, but there are many dimensions to each person that has a space for presentation, or maybe not presentation. Maybe there are parts of the many voices within that never gets a say. And I find that when there is an ecology that I make, I'm the maker of that ecology. When I make that ecology, the voices tend to gather in support of me listening.
I will endeavor to say back to you not just what I heard, but what I have experienced in this insight. There is there an invitation to realize, first, that we are not one entity, one thing. Rather, we are an orchestra of many parts, of many voices within. Step one. Step two, when we are preoccupied on the inside, often the nature of it is the different parts are quarreling or arguing with each other. And or that there are parts that don't feel that they receive their space or their attention. Oh, by the way, step three, when we are in that state, we're not very good listeners for anybody else because we are inside the argument inside. Step four, when we become good listeners inside, by which there is an invitation to make space for those different lives, we actually enlarge our space. Step 5, we therefore can become better listeners for others by becoming, firstly, better in listening inside to these lives. Because as they are listened to these parts, they make the space to listen to the multiple or many lives in the other person. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a few things in response to your questions, Aviv. And it really is the juicy question, isn't it? How does one cultivate this art? And well, you know, something very simple that I've been discovering is meeting together with others who want to practice the same thing, deep listening, and doing that regularly. Every 2 weeks, something starts to build, something starts to grow. And you spoke about us being a multiplicity. It takes time for the different parts of oneself to catch up with the program. Oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we're on with. And what I've found is that there's like shoots coming out from the Friday meet to other times. I'll catch myself thinking, yes, I'm going to consciously listen right now in another circumstance. I'm going to choose to take this building, feeling, state, if you will, ways that are growing as I'm going along with this practice. I'm now going to say, I'm going to take those. Let's apply them right here, right now. Consciously, deliberately, I choose to. And so it feels that it's starting to get more and more space in me at other timings. And there's really no substitute for repetition and keeping on practicing it, because there's so much you learn at different times, in different moments about it, because it may be more easy for some people to listen in the morning. For some people, it might be a lot easier in the evening. And why is that? So it opens up all kinds of discovery. Love the question about, when it's really challenging and really difficult to listen. Well, what do you do then? And I wouldn't claim to have any ready-made answers for that. But there are things you can try. So a simple thing like, let's take the dialogue from this room we're in to outdoors. Now, I have found that can have an amazing effect, because suddenly from something quite a compressive space and environment, you're now into something a lot more expansive. Or let's take this conversation for a ride. Let's go mobile. Because walking, you spoke about the aura refreshing every few seconds. Well, guess what? As you're walking along the road or walking along a path, you're leaving it behind, which has got to be surely a lot better than stewing in it in the same space for 2 hours, where it's just to build and build and build and build. Yeah. And even slightly more subtle things like, where are we sitting in relation to each other? Are we face to face? Could we try just angling out a bit, and not so direct? So I think really there's a lot of things to play with in this. Maybe have a few ideas should something arise. You got a few cards you can play, a few things you can try that might help ease the situation. I think there was a third, so I'll see if it comes.
Well, your number one was an invitation to get in the listening gym. Get inside the listening gym to practice.
Yeah.
And your number two was become situationally and environmentally aware. What is the setup and what would you change even in the place where you are, or go out and change the setting and the environment and the ecology. So I know you have a tidy mind, so maybe you have received now the third thing you're going to say.
We'll leave that one for another day.
Okay.
It's not coming, and that's okay. That's okay.
One thing I've observed, especially with difficult conversations, is people will disagree too early in the process. They have not achieved any kind of understanding of each other's positions, ideas, principles, values, because they never gave that the process it needs, right? And so I think one of the roles of that inner work of listening and listening in a difficult situation is to give it the space and time to allow someone to speak to a point where you have a complete understanding of what they're trying to say, and then maybe you disagree with it, and then hopefully they would give you the turn to do the same thing and build your idea, and then you have questions back and forth until there's clarity, and then some kind of agreement or disagreement at that point. But too often people get hung up on early words, early trigger words, for example, and they just hotly disagree with one another without creating the space for where is this going and where is it deeply coming from inside a person. That's one thing I would say.
That sounds, Charles, as real humanity. To actually take the patience to listen to another. And it's quite a challenge. But that challenge needs a decision that you want to see the human race win from all situations, I would say.
I wonder actually if it's also natural. Sometimes when my granddaughter comes over, she's just come from school and she's disjointed and hot and demanding and all over the place. And to just take a minute and actually listen to her and listen to what she needs, she can switch that like that. But if I don't have that in me, the afternoon is spent trying to find that. So I wonder if it's actually something natural in us that somehow either gets left for what we're supposed to do, or it's not supported as a natural skill, but can be reconnected to if a person chooses.
Yeah, it's really curious. I just had the thought a moment ago. When it comes to listening, it's very hard to switch off one's ability to listen. I mean, even before you fall asleep, it's like that becomes an unconscious act, that something else does it for you to allow that process of healing to go on. But throughout the living day, as long as we're up and awake, the consciousness somehow is attached with listening. And to my mind, it feels so much more these days, that feeling of sharing that's possible. I can't imagine not being able to hear music or to hear another person speak. Can you imagine being a babe, a soul just come into the world, and you couldn't hear your mother's voice? And it does happen to some people. But what I'm saying is that special ability that's been given to humans to be able to share, especially through hearing. And I'm finding myself far more in awe today, within the context of this conversation, at the reality of that ability to be able to hear at all the different levels. Because internally, I tend to think my intuition is something I try to listen for. And the knowings that I get, I try to listen for. Like we were saying earlier, there's all these different lives in us, and then it's like sharing with someone else. It's so painful when you don't get received, when you're trying to share something that feels so precious to you. So, it might be some understanding about a quality that you've finally got a feeling for that's waking up in you, and you want to share it with someone, and it just doesn't go across, and it doesn't go across. Because when that essence leaves you, it really leaves you, and you're received by someone. And then there's this magical dance that Ashram was saying earlier that goes on between us, with the flow of life, because it is received, and then it's renewed, and then it's refined. And you think, well, why? What's it for? Why do we need this refinement? And in the end, I come to the conclusion it's not just refinement for my own inner lives and my own understanding or perception of the place that maybe I have in my function or purpose on this planet, but maybe it's something else needs to be received, and that's the reason why we have that sharing that goes on between us. Yeah, so it's been absolutely wonderful to be a part of this process.
Yeah, I want to add that it's a marvelous domain that I feel much richer and willing to train my listening skills. And in terms of preparing the ecology for listening, something that arose from what everyone said was maybe to create the space, the time, and offer to someone your undivided attention. Close the mobiles, the TVs, and say, I'm going to listen to you. And the other is maybe to ask, or if you don't dare to ask, to be sensitive on how another person wants to be listened to. So maybe they just want a shoulder to cry on, let's say, or they don't want a canceling ear at that time. Maybe they just want a neutral space, or maybe they want to be listened, as some of you said very eloquently, they want to be listened through the heart. And maybe they just want to be loved and embraced as an essence. And maybe they just need, what they are processing, they just need a neutral, as you were saying, Cynthia, a neutral mirror. And no words need to be spoken. And if they are processing something wrong, and you are really in a neutral third vector space, maybe it just drops. They hear the sound of their of something that is not, let's say, in place or in tune, and it just drops. And thinking of the listening priests and this amazing capacity of some priests that they exist in this world, and it doesn't have to be a priest. And I think some of you are definitely one of them. So thank you for your service.
I can see there's another side to this coin. Like every coin has two sides. Because it has to do with the art of speech. and being able to listen to oneself first. Because my ears are the closest to my mouth, and they hear everything earlier than all of you. That's interesting, eh? Because the brain does both. So it speaks and it listens to what it says. And it makes me to the art of being interesting to listen to, in a way of advertisement. Everything in nature just makes the sound of its nature. There's nothing in between. It just does what it does. And that's maybe another art, to be able to really speak what's going on in you and to make it interesting.
I thought about it today. There is an art called oratory, to do with the skill of speech, how to speak in public. So we can develop the art of oratory.
Well, perhaps to not bring this to an end or conclusion, but to pause the recording in a moment or two. It feels as though we have been inside the different depths and different spaces of listening, and that we have enriched each other with the practice of listening, with some of the discoveries and the inner states and experiences that create listening. We sensed a little bit into the work of listening, and also what can practically be done to improve or enhance listening. And we also experienced some of the deeper senses of the stillness underlying listening. So there is a whole universe that we just touched here. And perhaps there is a whole other space to explore on another exploration like this in the future, where we move the focus even more from the discovery of listening to each other and listening inside to this other dimension, which is what is it that we sometimes create together as a group, as a circle, certain field. I talked about the energy field of each person, and yet when we come together and we create conductive listening, there is a shared space, shared field that we create. And there are also dimensions to be explored, because it's one thing where we simply create the shared space, and then there are places in the world where people practice this with a certain specific intention. We are all familiar, or at least know, of the Quakers' practice, where the idea is that you come together and you only speak when spoken to or spoken through. So in such a way, there are times where we may choose to come together and listen to healing. The invitation is that on this occasion we don't need to speak from the self, but we are looking to give voice to the intelligence and the spirit and the wisdom of healing. And then there may be times where we may choose to come together and we may ask, could we try to give voice today to the struggle, to the plight, to the need of the young, youth in this world who are probably the most struggling youth generation in history because of pressures, the intensities, the smart devices, the social media. There's so many elements of that. And is there a way for us to be together in a listening ecology, either with them present or without them present, with us presencing that need and give voice to that need, try to speak to that life, and then listen to where we might be led with listening to that. So I'm describing the sense that with the evolving practice of creating space, creating a neutral space, creating a neutral space into which we may choose to bring particular intentions, devotional intentions, and listen to these intentions. And could it be that when we do so in small, with a small circle, in some way we change something even beyond us? Because if this indeed is a hologramic universe, then the definition of it is that when you change one fractal in the hologram, the whole hologram has changed. So thank you for, more than anything, the spirit of kindness and generosity that envelops, as some of you said, the choice, the intention. I'm now choosing to be in listening. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes I work for it, and still I choose that because it's important, because I'm curious, because I love the fact that we can listen to each other. Thank you. To be continued.